So I will talk about, that's shortly a reminder for you in the morning from Florian's talk about the roles. Then I will tell you how you can push your own assets to the Organicity platform. Afterwards, I will show you shortly how you can use our Organicity accounts for your own application. Then I will give you some details on the access tokens, so just you have an idea how they work, and at the end I will give you a short live demonstration. So first, roles within the Organicity accounts. Just a short reminder from the morning session. We have administrators, that are basically we have experimenters, which are you, we have participants, and we have users, which are not participants, experimenters, and so on. So keep this in mind for my presentation. Next step, how to push an asset to the Organicity platform. To push an asset to the Organicity platform, first of all, you need to log into the experimenter portal, how it was shown to you by Luis in the morning, and after you created your experiment, you will find some identifiers for your experiment. For example, you get an experimenter ID, you get an experiment ID, and you get an application ID. These identifiers are needed in the next step. Also make sure that your experiment is running, as Luis was showing in the morning. You can click on this button. I will show it as well in the live demo at the end. So if you have these identifiers, we can start to create some HTTP headers. The HTTP headers needed to push an asset are, in the first step, some authorization header, which is a bearer token. How this token works, I will tell you afterwards. The next step is you have to add the content type and accept header, both is application JSON. Then you add the X Organicity application and X Organicity experiment header, which are the application ID, which you also get from the experimenter portal, and the experiment ID. I just created an example which includes the two identifiers here, which I have shown on the slide before. You can add your token as well, and these are the headers you need to push an asset to the Organicity platform. Next step is you need a valid body, you need an asset. As Evangelos was explaining before, every asset has an ID and a type and an amount of attributes. This, for example, is a really working valid asset. For example, you include here an ID with a given asset ID. We have a type. In this example, I created the type URN-OC entity type demo just for this demonstration, and a time instant. For example, we have the ISO 6801 as it was shown before by Evangelos as well, and the corresponding value. Keep in mind that this time instant value is the minimal required attribute for any asset which you push to the Organicity platform. Now we want to talk about this asset ID, how this asset ID created. Evangelos did it before, but I will just give a short recap. You take your ID, you say it's URN, Organicity, OC, entity, experimenters, so it's from you. Then you include there your main experimenter ID, your experiment ID, and the asset ID. All this, no, not all, but the first two you get again from your experimenter portal, and you have an asset ID. And this last asset ID is really application specific. So here you can decide on your own how this asset ID can look like. For example, I created an asset ID which looks like URN, OC, entity ID, experimenters. Included there the main experimenter ID from the experimenter portal, followed by the experiment ID, and I just added a 0. So this is my first asset ID. So let's wire everything together. Yeah, we have to push it with an HTTP post to the endpoint, which is shown on this web page. It's experimenter.orion.organicity.eu/v2/entities. And the full example is just this post on this entity with some also with the headers I explained before and the asset body. Now just one last thing is missed to push an asset. It's the access token. And now I will tell you how to get access tokens by you or your experimenters, participants for your experiments. no, I'm not doing it now, I'm doing it some 2 slides later. If you pushed some asset to our platform, you will get hopefully a 201 created, which tells you yes, the asset is created within our platform, and you get a location header, which tells you where you can find your asset. After your pushing was successful, you can immediately use also the asset discovery service by using this URL shown below, like discovery organicity u/v0/assets, and include your asset ID. Now I want to show you or to tell you a bit about the details how you can integrate organicity accounts for your application. Again, this part is really technical driven, so let's jump in. First of all, you have to know about 2 endpoints. The first endpoint is the authorization endpoint, which is this one, and you have the token endpoint. Both URLs look quite similar, but /auth or /token. Somehow I missed one slide. No. The title is a bit wrong. And but doesn't matter. If you create an experiment within your experimental portal, you don't just get these identifiers we saw above. You also get a client ID and a client secret. The client ID is public, so you can add it to your source code, even publish it somewhere on the web page. But there's also a client secret, and as the name says already, it's a secret. It's private and must be kept confidential. Organicity itself is an OAuth 2 server, and this server supports a lot of different code flows, login flows, or grants, how it is called in the RFC. And I want to show you this authorization code grant in the slides just for a second, so you have an idea how this integration of organicity accounts could work for your application. Step 1 is you must extend the authorization endpoint, which I was shown before in the slide, with some query parameters. The first one is your client ID. The second is the response type code. So the flow we are using now is authorization code grant, so you have to add code here. And a redirect URE. The redirect URE is important. So if the user logs in the organicity accounts, the user gets redirected back to that URL as soon as the login was successful. This redirect URL can be configured in the experimental portal as well. After this was successful, the user logs in. No, this is just an example of the request. For example, you see here this organicity accounts /auth stuff, the client ID, the response type, the redirect URL. Now the OAuth 2 server responds to the login if it's successful with the so-called authorization code. It could look like this, like https example.org, so include here your domain, some callback address and code, whatever. As soon as you have this code, you're not done. You have to do a second step, and for the second step you must extend the token endpoint with some query parameters. You have to add the grant type authorization code. You have to add your client ID again and your client secret. Because we have to include here our client secret, you must do this somehow from your backend service. You shouldn't do this from a JavaScript only application. Again, add a redirect URL, which must be the same as before, and include the code from step 1. This could look like this. Yeah, it's an HTTP post to this token endpoint with all these query parameters. And if this query is successful, then the server responds with a JSON record, which contains, which looks like this, and it contains an attribute called access token. And exactly this attribute access token is finally the access token which you can use to push an asset, for example. You see here it expires in 300. 300 is seconds, so the token expires in 5 minutes. This was quite fast, I know, but we wrote down this in some in a document on GitHub, and usually you don't have to write your own OAuth2 adapters. So usually you just use a existing library where you configure this auth authorization endpoint, this token endpoint, and you're done. For example, if you write your application in Node.js, there is with Passport, you can use Passport OAuth2 and you're more or less done. Or if you want to use PHP, you can use OAuth2 client. Actually, for these two examples, we created minimal working examples, which are also on GitHub. So feel free to check them out and play with them. I want to tell you a bit more about the access tokens, so you have an idea of what's behind it. As said before, the access tokens are valid for just 5 minutes. All access tokens can be used as bearer tokens to call different organicity APIs. For example, to push an asset, as I have shown at the beginning of my presentation. Actually, the tokens with an organicity account are not just some random tokens. They are actually OpenID Connect tokens, which are represented as JSON Web Tokens. So I will show it to you in a second how they look like, but such JSON Web Token, or JWT, has 3 parts, each divided with a dot. The first is a MAC, the first contains a set of claims, and the last one is the final signature. An example of the decoded claims could be this JSON. For example, you have an expired, it tells you that this token expires exactly at this time. You have a subject, the subject is the user ID. You have a type, bearer, that tells you if you can use this token as a bearer token. And we have some roles included in this token as well. For example, in this case, I have the experimenter role. Actually, this is a token I created some days ago. Again, you don't have to write your own JWT parsing stuff. You can use existing JWT libraries. For example, for Node.js, you can use JSON Web Token. For Java, you can use JGWT. Or for PHP, you can use PHP JWT. By the way, if you want to verify a token, so if it's really valid and if it was issued by organized accounts, you need our public certificate, which is also published on the GitHub. So next, I want to show it in the live demo, so you see it's working what I showed in this presentation. So first of all, let's go to a browser, and I prepared already an asset. Not an asset, and a query, a post, an HTTP post. And this is more like a stub. Here I have an authorization header, which is an asset token we don't have yet.
Dennis, can you zoom in? Sorry for the interruption. Can you just...
Yeah. Can I what?
Can you zoom in a little bit the browser?
Zoom. Okay. I hope. Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Enough?
Yeah. For me, it's fine.
So we have some authorization header. With the access token, you have to use the content type header application JSON, accept header application JSON, the experiment header, and the application header, as shown before in the presentation. So next, I will log into the experimenter portal to grab this IDs. Experimenter. Zooming in again. Here I will use this experiment, which was created by Louis in the morning. And if I click on it, and if I click on apps on this application, I have the IDs up here. So let's start with experiment ID. I'm just copying it, pushing it to the header. I'm going back to the experimenter portal, copying the application ID, pasting it to the header. So the headers are almost done. Next, let's go to the body. The asset has an ID, so here we have to add the experimenter ID. This is the one on the top of here. Main experimenter ID, followed by the experiment ID, followed by an asset ID. I will use just the one. I have an ID. I have an entity type demo. I have a time. What's the time now? In Germany it's 7:15. And yeah, it doesn't work now because I don't have a token yet. To get a token, I said before I created a library, a simple demo application. You can just check out and build it on your own. And after you checked it out, you can just configure this server. You have to include their client ID and client secret. This is also included, or you can find it as well in the experimenter portal. Just go in your experiment, click on show credentials. Here we have the client ID. Pasting it here. I'm copying the client secret. Where's my pointer? Here. Storing this, and I'm running it. npm start. It's a Node.js application, and my server is running now. So now I can open this web page on port 3000. Click on login. At the moment I'm logged in on the experimenter portal with demo experimenters. I'm immediately redirected back to this tool, so the user even doesn't realize that he was logged into my tool. Here I have now the access token. I'm copying it already. To the right you can click on this JWT.io if you like to and inspect this token. And if you scroll down, you see this token is my ID and some roles which belong to my ID. So now I'm copying this token, or I copied already. I'm adding it as a bearer token to the header. Well, and now I'm posting this asset to the Organicity facility. So sending post, and it's created. Let's create a second asset with another ID. Now we have already 7017. Let's post that asset, created. So what else? I can show you that these assets are existing inside the asset discovery service. So I'm copying the ID. I'm already prepared this link, including the asset ID. And here it is. Here is our asset, which is just pushed to the central, to the Organicity platform. I can exchange this ID to 0, which was the first asset, and yeah, here it is with a 1515 timestamp. One last thing I want to show you is if you go back to your experimenter portal, to click on your experiment, you can click afterwards on the Assets tab, and you should see your assets you created in your experiment. So this was a, I know, fast how to push an asset. So feel free to look to the movie again, and yeah. Live demo. If you have any questions, of course, use the tech channel on Slack, or contact me in person, by mail, by Skype, by whatever. If you need any further communication channels, just write me an email. Here are some links. So everything what was presented in this presentation is also documented inside the GitHub. So there are 4 different documents which tell you much more about the details, and finally the code I use in this demo.